Welcome, friend, to this quiet corner of the night, where restless thoughts give way to the soft rhythm of old stories. You found a sleepy historian, a place for calm bedtime storytelling, where the past moves slowly, spoken softly, and always with a touch of worn-out parchment and wind-blown waves. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, if boring history for sleep, soft voices, and the slow turning of forgotten pages brings you peace, feel free to gently like the video and subscribe, but only if it actually helps you drift. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? It's oddly comforting to know who else is out there, sailing into sleep, guided by the same gentle voice, toward the same old tales. So dim the lights, let the stars take their places, and let the sailcloth flutter quietly in your mind's wind. Tonight, we'll trace the journey of a Viking longship, setting out across the vast and treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. Ever wonder what it was like to sail such a sea? To row beneath gray skies with numb fingers gripping weather-worn oars, your only guide cry of a gull or the shimmer of starlight. The Vikings, those relentless seafarers from the north, endured biting cold, endless waves, and uncertain horizons in search of new lands. But this is not the story of conquest or battles. Not tonight. This is the slow rhythm of their voyage. The creak of the hull, the scent of salt damp rope, the rustle of cloaks in the wind. We won't hurry because they couldn't. This journey begins not with drama, but with routine, the daily tasks, the quiet preparations, the camaraderie of the crew. We'll examine the craftsmanship of the Viking longship, the subtle expertise needed to read the waves, and the quiet, human resilience behind every stroke of the oar. This is a soft-spoken history documentary, but it's also a lullaby, told to the smell of smoked fish packed for the voyage, the whisper fog over the bow, and a heartbeat-like rhythm of rowing under a gray northern sky. We'll listen to the soothing sounds of the sea, explore the inner lives of those who live and drifted by its edge, and discover not only what they did, but what it felt like to be there, aboard, among them, beneath the same sky. So let's begin, with time stretched long and unhurried, with calm narration and gentle curiosity, with relaxing history to fall asleep to. Imagine yourself in woolen furs, waiting as the longship sail is raised. The dock creaks under heavy boots. A slow push off the shore, and we're off into mist and memory. Imagine yourself standing beside a long, narrow vessel resting on wooden rollers at the edge of a quiet fjord. The wind is soft, carrying the scent of pine and cold salt. The longship is still for now, its hull carved from oak, its planks overlapped like scales, each one fixed with precision and care. These ships were not built in haste. They were born of forests and forged by hands that understood both timber and tide. The Viking longship or langskip was more than transportation. It was an extension of the men who sailed it, built to glide through ocean swells, shallow rivers, and icy inlets alike. It was a marvel of early engineering, sleek and flexible, elegant and strong. The keel, a single, solid beam, runs the length of the ship like a spine. From it rises the symmetrical curve of the hull, shallow in depth but long in reach. Most ships were between 16 to 30 meters in length, with space for as many as 60 oarsmen. Though some vessels stretched farther, the pride of a chieftain's fleet. These were not merchant barges or floating castles. They were fast, light, and quiet. Their secret lay in their versatility, double-ended. They could reverse direction easily without turning, a trait valuable in both exploration and quick escapes. The shallow draft allowed them to sail close to shore or even be carried over land when needed. For all their grace, there were also weapons, the long, upward curving prow often adorned with carved dragon or serpent, a figurehead meant to terrify enemies and honor the gods. Crafting one of these vessels required more than brute strength. It required time, knowledge, and deep patience. First, the timber. Oak was preferred, dense, durable, and abundant. Each tree chosen carefully, sometimes shaped while still growing, to form the natural curve of ribs and beams. The builders, called bat-bigger, were specialists. With adzes, axes, and draw knives, they shaped every piece by hand, often without written plans. The planks were joined edge to edge using a method known as clinker building, overlapping like fish scales, and secured with iron rivets or wooden pegs. This created a hull that flexed with the sea instead of fighting against it, a subtle give and take that allowed for surprising speed and resilience. Between the planks, tarred wool or moss was pressed to keep the water out. These were not perfectly sealed ships, but they were watertight enough and bailed often. Above all, the longship was communal. Each man had a place, a bench, an oar, and a chest which doubled as a seat. Their belongings were sparse: a wool cloak, a carved bowl, a knife, and perhaps a small token of family or faith. No space was wasted, and every movement had purpose. Even the sail, square and red-striped, woven from wool and stiffened with animal fat, had to be furled and unfurled with precision, depending on wind and need. When raised, the sail filled with low, full sound, not a roar, but a hum, like a giant breathing. The mast, stepped in the middle of the deck, was supported by stays and bracing beams. And when the wind fell still, the oarsmen took over, their motion steady, unified, repetitive. This was not sailing for leisure. It was rhythm and routine, muscle and will, a bond between men and machine. The ship was not just a vehicle, it was a presence. It moved across the water with dignity, and its builder spoke of it with pride, even reverence. To own or command such a vessel was to be respected. To build one was to master wood, water, and time. And to sail one, that was to know the heartbeat of the sea. So, before the journey begins, we pause here, beside the silent longship, smelling of sap and tar. The crew has not yet boarded. The sky is gray. The tide rises slowly. And the boat waits, as it has waited all winter, for wind, for purpose, and for the first quiet push into the waves. The longship was ready, resting lightly on the tide. But a ship alone is no voyager. It needed men, not just sailors, but oarsmen, hunters, fighters, cooks, craftsmen, and dreamers. The Viking crew was not a navy in uniform, but a small society afloat, each man shaped by the sea, the land, and the weight of shared responsibility. Imagine them arriving one by one, wrapped in woolen cloaks against the morning chill. Some young, their eyes bright with the thrill of the unknown. Others older, with sun-creased brows and hands like carved driftwood. No rank shouted here. Yet there was order, and each man knew his place. The helmsman, often called the steeramar, stood apart, trusted to guide the vessel with hand and voice. He read the wind like a poet, the sea like a seasoned farmer reading the soil. At the back of the ship, he stood near the tiller, a large steering oar mounted on the starboard side, where he could feel the longship's movement and keep its head true. Beside him, the navigator, perhaps a man with a deep memory and a keen eye, might not read maps, for they had none. Instead, he remembered the shape of coastlines, the path of stars, the direction of bird flights, and the color of deep versus shallow water. These men were not trained formally. They learned from fathers, uncles, long nights of storytelling by firelight, and decades of watching the horizon. The rowers formed the pulse of the crew. They sat two to a bench, side by side, each with an oar cut to size. Rowing was not about strength alone, but rhythm, a shared motion that rose and fell like breath. For hours they moved in silence, eyes fixed forward or half-lidded in trance. When the sail was up, the oars rested, but hands were never idle. There was always rope to mend, sails to check, and equipment to inspect. Each man brought his own skill. Some were smiths, able to repair metal rivets, and weapons with only a small anvil and fire bowl. Others were woodworkers, shaping broken oars into usable tools. One might be a hunter, trained to track seal or seabird when land was near. Another might be a skald, a poet, keeping spirits lifted with verses, some bawdy, some brave, some just funny in the dim gray light of a stormy morning. Meals were shared communally. Dried fish, hard bread, butter, smoked lamb, simple fare, but sustaining. Water stored in barrels, meat in skins. They ate while sitting cross-legged on the deck or leaning back against their chests. Laughter was not rare, but it was quiet, more a chuckle than a roar, shaped by fatigue and closeness. There were no cabins, no privacy. When sleep came, it came under cloaks, pressed shoulder to shoulder, often damp, often rocking. But bonds were forged this way. Stories shared under pale starlight. Comfort offered in silence. Grief, too, was shared, for the sea did not always return what it took. Discipline was soft but firm. Arguments were expected but not indulged. The sea offered little room for pride. All depended on each. If one rower lost rhythm, the boat swayed. If one lookout drifted, land could be missed or rock struck. Trust was not an abstract thing. It was daily, practical, and earned. There were moments of joy. The thrill of seeing dolphins race the prow. The calm of a mirror-flat morning sea. The pride of handling the sail just right to catch a sharp breeze. These were not luxuries, but fuel, reminders that even hardship bore beauty. So the crew became the soul of the ship, not separate from it, but part of its motion, its memory, its meaning. And as they loaded the last of their belongings, checked their weapons, and looked once more to the gray line of the sea, there was little to say. The journey was beginning. The longship creaked gently in the shallows, the tide now tugging at its hull with quiet insistence. The men moved with practiced ease, preparing the vessel for the voyage ahead. Loading the ship was not a task of brute speed, but a careful order for balance, survival, and peace of mind. Every item placed aboard had a purpose. Space was limited, and the sea offered no forgiveness for overloading or poor preparation. So each chest, each bundle, each coil of rope had its designated place, assigned by experience more than instruction. First came the provisions. Food was paramount. Dried fish, salted meat, and hard flatbread, dense and packed to last. Butter sealed in horn containers. Smoked lamb or goat wrapped in linen and oil to keep. There were sacks of barley and beans, often parched and toasted to prevent spoilage. Fresh food was few and precious, apples or onions packed in moss, and dried herbs for both flavor and medicine. Drinking water was stored in wooden barrels, sealed with resin. Water was heavy, but its absence could be fatal. Mead and ale were carried too, though not in excess. A comfort, a celebration, or a balm on cold, salt-bitten evenings. For many days, mouths would taste little but salt and smoke, so every sip and crumb was carefully preserved. Each man brought a sea chest, which doubled as a seat when rowing. Inside, aside from food, they packed warm cloaks, spare tunics, bone combs, flint and steel, a small knife, a bowl carved from wood, and often a token from home. A carved bead, a runestone, a scrap of woven cloth. These tokens reminded them why they sailed and for whom. Tools followed next. The Vikings were not only warriors, but makers. Alongside their axes and sword were hatchets, whetstones, sail needles, spare planks, tar for caulking, and even small anvils for repairs at sea. These items were bundled with care, wrapped in sailcloth or tucked beneath benches, ready to be reached in storm or stillness. Weapons were stored with equal thought. Each man carried a blade, some ornate, others plain. Shields lined the rails of the ship, both for quick access and as protection against sea spray and wind. Spears were stacked in bundles near the mast. Bows were wrapped in oiled skins, their strings kept dry. Not every voyage expected conflict, but every ship prepared for it. Even more subtle were the spiritual supplies. In hidden pouches or tied around wrists were small charms and carved amulets. Thor's hammer for protection, runes for luck, smooth stones marked with secret symbols. The sea was a living force of the Vikings, full of gods, spirits, and moods. Offerings were sometimes made before departure. A splash of ale into the water, a whispered prayer into the wind. The loading process itself had a rhythm, a quiet choreography. The men spoke little, focused on balance and order. The heaviest items were placed low and centered to keep the longship steady. Nothing loose, everything lashed or packed, ready for days of rocking and spray. And then, before departure, a final walk around. The helmsman inspecting knots, the navigator checking the horizon, a silent nod shared between crew and vessel. No horns blew, no crowds gathered. This was not a spectacle, but a rite, practiced and personal. Imagine the ship now, fully laden yet still graceful. It floats low but eager, the carved dragon's head at the prow watching the horizon. The oars are laid out, the sail ready to rise with the next breeze. Around you, the fjord reflects a dull gray sky, and gulls call softly in the distance. Everything they need is aboard, not for comfort, but for endurance, not for ease, but for survival. And now, only the sea lies ahead. Now the shore has disappeared. Behind the longship lies only the fading scent of pine and the silence of land slipping out of memory. Before it, nothing but the vast, restless gray of the North Atlantic, deep cold and ever-changing. And yet they sailed. To most today, the sea is a mystery marked by digital maps and glowing screens. But for the Vikings, it was a living presence, known by rhythm, by feel, by the quiet clues it whispered to those who listened. Navigation was not a science of instruments. It was a craft of the senses, eyes, ears, hands, memory. The stars were their companions. At night, the skies stretched wide and cold, a dome of flickering frost. The North Star, Lidarstjarna, hung low and constant. It was their anchor, their guide when the clouds parted. The crew would lie back on their cloaks, eyes tracing familiar shapes of constellations. Orion, the Bear, the Wain. Each night sky told a story. And stories, as always, were how they remembered direction. By day, the sun marked their path. Even when hidden by fog or cloud, its light cast patterns on the waves. Some navigators carried sunstones, translucent crystals of calcite, which they held to the sky to detect the sun's hidden glow. With this, they could keep course even under overcast skies, guided not by sight but by shimmer. But it was not the sky alone they read. They listened to the wind. A steady western gust meant progress toward the east. A cold northern breeze hinted at icy lands nearby. They watched the waves, long swells from a northman a storm had passed days before. Far away, choppy waters from the southwest told of shifting pressure. The sea had language, and the Vikings learned it not with books, but with bone-deep familiarity. They studied birds, too. Gulls and kittiwakes meant land was within a day's reach. Puffins flew low and rarely far. Ravens, released from the ship, would fly straight toward shore, unless they circled back, uncertain. One raven, circling 3 times before vanishing into mist, became a story retold for generations. Driftwood was also a sign. Logs from distant forests told of rivers flowing out of unknown lands. Seaweed clinging to the hull was tasted, salty and green, or dry and yellowed, offering hints about proximity to shore. Even whales marked paths. Some sailors swore the great beasts traveled ancient underwater roads, and that following them could lead to islands unseen. Whether myth or truth, it was a comfort, a rhythm in the deep, familiar and steady. There was no single tool, no singular method. Navigation was a quiet mosaic of clues, each one fragile on its own but powerful when woven together. A curve of the wave, a line of flight, a softness in the air. A sailor might not explain how he knew where he was, only that he felt it, in the way the ship moved beneath his feet or how the sea spoke through the tiller. And when doubt crept in, they relied on instinct born of repetition. Routes were passed down, from grandfather to grandson, from helmsman to apprentice. They were told in stories and sagas, in the rise and fall of verses sung around firelight and remembered silently beneath gray skies. Imagine yourself aboard now, staring into horizonless mist. The ocean rolls steadily, the sky a dull silver above. You know not where land lies, but the ship feels certain. The sail pulls gently. The helmsman adjusts the rudder with one hand. No one speaks. The only sound is a quiet slap of water and the creak of wet wood. The ship does not hesitate. It glides, guided not by devices, but by the subtle trust of men who have done this before. This is how the Vikings found Iceland, how they reached Greenland, how some, it said, touched the shores of a distant land called Vinland, and still the sea stretched out before them, quiet, ancient, and deep. The sea is not always storm or spectacle. More often it is repetition, a quiet rhythm of motion and monotony that stretches the days into something timeless. Life aboard a Viking longship was shaped not by battle cries, but by endless, echoing patterns. Row, rest, watch, eat, repair, sleep, repeat. Imagine yourself aboard now, not in a moment of glory, but of routine. It is morning or perhaps midday. It's hard to tell. The sky is a pale blanket, the horizon smudged with mist. The air smells of wet wood, old salt, and wool. A gull passes overhead, unnoticed. The sail hangs slack. The wind is gone. And so, the oars return to hand. Each man takes his place. The sea chest becomes a bench once more. The oars slide out, long, smooth, and worn from hours of use. There is no spoken signal. The rhythm begins almost on its own, as if remembered by the ship itself. A low creak, a splash, a pull. The motion is steady, not fast, not slow, just constant. Rowing is less about power than endurance. The strongest rower is not the loudest, but the one who keeps time hour after hour. The helmsman hums quietly, perhaps an old tune, to help keep the beat. The skald murmurs a verse, a memory of home, of old kings, of warm fires. The words drift with the wind. Some men mouth the lines, others only breathe. When the sail is raised again, the rowers rest, not by lying down, but by turning to tasks. There's always something to do. Checking the ropes, which fray under constant tension. Inspecting the sail for tears, the oarlock for wear. A man might oil his boots or sharpen his blade, not out of fear, but habit. Another might scrape salt from a shield edge, or rinse a tunic in a bucket of seawater, then hang it in the sun. Tools are shared. Advice is muttered. Jokes, if told, are quiet and dry. Meals are sparse but regular. A shared piece of dried fish passed from hand to hand. Bread softened with seawater or mead. Each man has his own bowl, carved from horn or wood, and perhaps a spoon, though fingers often suffice. Drinking water is rationed. Even in the endless sea, thirst is a constant threat. The barrels are opened only when needed, and every drop is precious. Some chew salt-tough roots to ease the dryness. Others simply endure. The day passes slowly. There is no distraction, no books, no lanterns, no hourglasses. Only the sea, the sky, and the ship. Occasionally, they pass floating debris or drift alongside a curious seal. These are moments of excitement, brief and wordless. Night brings no relief, only a different kind of routine. The crew does not sleep all at once. There are watches, short shifts to keep an eye on sail, sky, and sea. One man watches a sail while another keeps his eyes on the stars. Someone listens for changes in the waves. Most sleep in short turns, wrapped in cloaks, curl near the mast or beneath benches. The cold is constant. Blankets are rare. The dampness seeps into every seam. Yet men sleep from exhaustion, if nothing else. Dreams, when they come, are often of trees of fire, of heavy silence. And then morning again, or something like it. The ship rocks gently. The oars creak. A gull cries. Someone grumbles, sits up, and begins again. This is the rhythm of sea life. It numbs the mind, yet binds the crew. There is comfort in its constancy, a kind of peace in knowing what comes next. In time, the days blur together. You no longer count how many have passed. The ship is your world. The waves are your road. The rhythm becomes your heartbeat. Out here, surrounded by endless water, nature speaks softly, not with thunder, but with slow shifts of light, sound, and texture. The Vikings did not conquer the sea. They coexisted with it, enduring its moods, reading its patterns, and respecting its quiet warnings. There were moments of beauty so gentle, they might have passed unnoticed. A whale breaching in the distance, its slow arc followed by a lazy spray, drew silent attention from the crew. Eyes would lift not in alarm, but awe. Sometimes dolphins race a prow, their slick backs glinting silver against the waves. The rowers paused, grinned, and whispered each other, believing good luck. The sky, too, performed its own quiet miracles. One evening, the clouds parted just long enough for a band of soft green light to ripple along the horizon. The northern lights, the aurora borealis. No one spoke. The oars fell still. The longship rocked gently, wrapped in shadow and green flame. For a moment, they were suspended between sky and sea, breath held in reverence. But with beauty came danger, not loud or dramatic, but creeping, cloaked in silence. Fog, when it rolled in, came quickly and without warning. One moment, the horizon stretched wide and open. The next, it was gone. The mist swallowed sound, leaving only the splash of the oars and the occasional call of a distant gull. It disoriented the senses. Voices dropped to whispers. The helmsman leaned forward, eyes narrowed, trusting instinct more than vision. In such conditions, the ship could drift off course, miss land, or worse, strike hidden rocks. Storms were worse still. They did not come often, but when they did, the sea became a different creature. The sky turned slate gray, then black. The wind howled low and steady, building slowly until the sail had to be lowered and lashed. Waves rose like breathing walls, lifting the ship, then dropping it in slow motion falls that seemed to stretch time. The crew said little during storms. They held the ropes. They tightened the tiller. They bailed water. There were no cries of fear, just gritted teeth, clenched jaws, and steady hands. Some men prayed, not loudly, but inwardly, to gods of sea and wind. Others sang low songs, not to inspire courage, but to steady breath. One voice murmured, and others joined, a dirge, a memory, a tether. When storms passed, they left behind silence, not of peace, but of exhaustion. The crew counted faces, checked the hull, and offered quiet thanks. No celebration, just a slow return to rhythm. And then there were the small threats, ice floes, drifting logs, unseen shoals. The ocean offered no signposts, no guarantees. A sudden shift in wind might send the ship toward treacherous shallows. A floating log could crack the hull. An unfamiliar bird might suggest land where none lay. But for every threat, nature also offered sustenance. Rain collected in cloaks could be sipped. Seabirds led them toward fish. A change in wave pattern might signal a nearby island. The crew learned to observe, not control, to coexist, not resist. At night, with the sea calm and the stars returning, the helmsman stood once more by the tiller, adjusting course by the slow drift of heavens. The crew curled under cloaks, dreams thick with sky and salt. Above them, the clouds passed. Beneath, the deep held its secrets. And in between, the longship drifted, a quiet silhouette against the water, a vessel of flesh and wood, thought and will, caught in the breath between waves. After days or weeks at sea, the moment arrived as quietly as a breath. A gull first, circling the ship in widening arcs. Then the scent, earthy, different, faintly green. The rhythm of the waves changed subtly. their echoes returning quicker. And then on the horizon, a smear of darker gray rising from the sea, land. There was no cheer, no drumbeat of joy. The Vikings were not ones to celebrate early. Land was not always friendly, and arrival was only the beginning. But even so, a subtle shift stirred among the crew. Attention released, back straightened, brows lifted. The shore drew closer with excruciating slowness. The longship slid forward, oars dipped once more, and sails angled to harness every breath of wind. Details emerged, cliffs perhaps, or black sand, or tall grass bent by a wind different from the seas. Some shores were rocky and harsh, others soft and marshy, dotted with sea birds and strange trees. There was no standard template for new landings. Each encounter was different, but all carried a similar mood, quiet, alert, reverent. The Vikings had reached Iceland this way, then Greenland. Some sagas tell a distant coast even beyond, Vinland, perhaps part of the distant Americas. But whether myth or memory, the process was always the same. When the ship grounded in the shallows or was pulled onto a strand, the men stepped out slowly. First to check for danger, animals, enemies, treacherous footing. Then to explore. They touched the earth as if greeting an old friend. Some knelt and pressed their hands into the soil. Others looked to the sky, as if to mark the gods' approval. What did they feel in those moments? Possibility, relief, caution. The thrill of discovery was not loud or wild, but quiet and deep. The land might offer timber, fresh water, berries, or game. It might hold nothing but stone and wind. Either way, it was new and the sea had given it. The crew spread out, moving slowly, eyes scanning. Some tested the water of a stream. Others marked the sun's path, thinking of how the land might be settled or used. A few simply stood still, breathing, letting the silence settle into their bones. Not all discoveries led to settlement. Some lands were visited once, named and remembered in song. Others became bases, winter camps, trading posts, places to return to when the sea grew too wild. And some, like parts of Iceland, became home, villages sprouting slowly along fjords, each tied to the memory of a single ship's landing. But for this crew, discovery was a reward for endurance. The trials of wind, wave, and weariness found meaning here, in this quiet bay, on this unfamiliar shore. Whether they stayed for a season or a single night, the moment mattered. A story was born. As the crew prepared to unload a few supplies, pitch tents perhaps, or cook over driftwood, there was no shouting. Just the soft clink of gear, the low murmur of instructions, the sigh of a man settling onto solid ground. Later that night, seated around a small fire, they would speak in low voices of the voyage, of the birds they'd seen, of the color of the grass. And the helmsman might stare into the flames, eyes distant, already thinking of the sea once more. For while the land offered rest, it was the journey itself that made them feel alive. To sail was not only to reach, but to connect. Each time a Viking longship met a distant shore, it carried more than men and supplies. It brought with it stories, customs, ideas, and intentions, and it returned with new ones. The Viking voyages, born from survival and curiosity, became threads in a much larger historical fabric. Trade was one of the most immediate effects. Though the image of the Viking as raider has long dominated popular thought, the truth is far more textured. Many ships crossed the sea not to conquer, but to barter. Their longships, sleek and swift, carried cargo as easily as warriors, amber from the Baltic, walrus ivory from Greenland, furs from the northern forests. These goods were exchanged for silver, silk, spices, glassware, wine, and even exotic animals. In the markets of Dublin, York, and Hedeby, Norse traders mingled with Slavs, Franks, Arabs, and Celts. Some spoke multiple languages, or at least understood the gestures and rhythm of trade. A nod, a scale, a weight in the hand, all were part of the unspoken commerce of the age. And with goods came culture. Viking ships brought more than cargo. They carried stories, beliefs, and ways of living. In time, Viking settlers would leave behind Norse burial mounds, ship-shaped stone markers, and longhouses in foreign lands. In parts of England, their influence is still etched in place names, towns ending in by or Thorpe. Even the English language bears marks of Old Norse, simple, everyday words like sky, egg, window, and day. This was not always peaceful. Some voyages ended in conflict, and not all arrivals were welcomed. But even these interactions shaped the societies they touched. Kingdoms learned to defend coastlines. Fortifications changed. Legal systems adapted. In Ireland and Scotland, Viking influence can be seen in both urban foundations and cultural blending. The city of Dublin, for example, was first established as a Viking trading hub. In Normandy, Norse settlers blended into the fabric of Frankish society, eventually giving rise to the Normans, who themselves would later change history with the conquest of England in 1066. Further still, the legacy spread. From Vinland, whether real or only half remembered, to Russia's rivers, Norse presence left quiet footprints. They became mercenaries in the Byzantine Empire, guards in Constantinople, and explorers along the Dnieper. Yet through all this, the core remained, the sea and the ship. It was a ship that made this movement possible. Without the longship sleek and adaptable, there would have been no network, no exchange, no cultural imprint. The ship was not just a vessel, it was a message, a symbol of movement, connection, and the blurring of borders. And what are those left behind? Back home, stories of far-off lands grew with each telling. A boy might sit at the feet of his father, listening to tales of rivers wider than fjords, trees taller than halls, and stars that sang in foreign tongues. A carved token brought back from abroad, a silk scrap, a coin, a strange bone, became a family heirloom. The voyages lived on in saga and song, slowly shaping how the Norse saw the world and how the world saw them. Imagine the moment now. The ship returning home, sails patched, hull worn. On the shore, figures wait, shaded by smoke from home fires. The crew steps off not as heroes, but as messengers. Their words, simple and steady, become history in the telling. And somewhere, in the silence of a winter evening, a skull begins to hum a new verse. The longship creaked as it slid into familiar waters. The fjord narrowed gently, rising into green hills patched with moss and stone. Smoke curled from a few distant houses. A dog barked faintly. Somewhere nearby, a child called out. They were home. The journey had changed them, as it always did. Beards were longer, faces thinner, cloaks stiff with salt. The ship bore the marks of its voyage, cracked planks, stained ropes, an oar or two missing. Yet it floated steady and proud, as if it too recognized the shore. There was no parade, no ceremony, just quiet steps onto wet ground. Familiar ground, feet pressed into soil that no longer needed testing. Voices softened into local dialects. A man stooped to pick up a handful of earth, crumbling it in his fingers, a kind of reverence. Reunion came in murmurs, not grand embraces, but steady hands on shoulders, nods, the quiet relief of the returned. Wives, brothers, sons, old friends, they asked few questions. The sea's toll was visible enough. That evening, the hearth glowed brighter than usual. Around the fire, stories emerged slowly. A crewman described an island of black sand where birds filled the sky like smoke. Another told of a storm that bent the mast and pulled the sail from its lines. The skald hummed a new verse. Not all stories were told. Some were held back private or shaped later in the retelling. Memories softened what the sea had made sharp. Children leaned in close. Elders listened with closed eyes. A carved object passed hand to hand. A coin, a piece of driftwood shaped by foreign water, a feather too bright for local birds. Each item carried weight, a tale without words. Over the next days, the ship was pulled further ashore, cleaned, repaired. Nets were mended, provisions restocked, but there was no rush. Time slowed again. The frantic uncertainty of the ocean gave way to the rhythm of land. And yet, for many, the restlessness remained. Sitting by the shore, the helmsman traced patterns in the sand. The sailor who once watched gulls now watched smoke drift across the fjord, already thinking of tides. The skald added verses to his song, but his gaze often lingered on the horizon, because home was not only the destination. The sea had become part of them, in their speech, their stride, their silence. Each wave remembered, each gust of wind recalled. The voyage did not end on land. It lived on in memory, in rhythm, in legacy. Some would stay, rebuild, and grow old beneath their roofs. Others, drawn by something unspoken, would return to the ship once more. Another voyage, another discovery, another quiet firelight story to carry home. And so the cycle continued, not a conquest, not an empire, but a thread of movement stretching gently across the northern seas. As the fire crackled low and the last story faded into silence, one could almost hear it. The soft creak of wood, the hush of sail, the sea whispering at the edge of sleep. Before language, before stories, before sails, there was sound, the eternal murmur of the sea. Long before the Vikings carved their ships, long after their voyages ended, the ocean spoke the same quiet tongue. Waves, wind, and whisper. To a tired crew on the open sea, these sounds became more than background. They were comfort, familiar, rhythmic, like breathing. Imagine yourself now, lying in the hollow of the longship, your cloak pulled high, your body sore, but still. Above you, the stars blink faintly through streaks of cloud. The world is reduced to a handful of sensations, the cool night air, the faint salt sting, the gentle sway beneath you, and always the sound, waves, not crashing, not angry, but persistent. Each one rises and folds into the next, a soft lift, a slow fall. The hull creaks gently in response. Water laps at the sides in hushed syllables. It's not silence, but a living quiet, the kind that invites sleep, not thought. Wind moves like a soft breath across the surface. It doesn't howl. It sighs. Sometimes it hums through the sail, tugging the canvas like a child asking to play. Sometimes it dances over the deck, rustling cloaks, teasing hair, lifting the edge of a shield covered with playful fingers. Together, wind and water create a lullaby. The creak of the ship is part of it, too. The wooden timbers expanding and relaxing, joints adjusting as the ship breathes with the sea. Even the ropes contribute, their fibers stretching, singing faintly under tension. A symphony in minor key. The crew does not speak. At night, even the whispers are rare. Instead, they listen. A gull calls once in the distance. A wave slaps a little harder against the bow. Then all returns to the rhythm. Even storms, when distant, have their music, low, thrumming, ancient. Some sailors claimed they could hear voices in the sea. Not in madness, but in memory. Echoes of stories once told. Names murmured by the tide. Warnings or welcomes in the wind. Perhaps it was the sea speaking back, or perhaps it was a mind, softened by travel, dreaming aloud. In these sounds, time stretches. A single night might feel like many. A watch shift might pass in stillness, punctuated only by a distant splash or the faint creak of an or moved in sleep. The world is reduced to the basics of being, breath, sound, sway. Even upon return to land, many sailors miss these sounds. The quiet murmur of the sea lingered in the back of the mind, like a tune remembered but not sung. Some said they could hear it in their sleep. Others returned to the shore, not to sail, but simply to listen. In the sagas, the sea is rarely loud. It is described with respect, deep gray, endless. But those who lived on it knew its quiet music best, the slow rhythm that lulled them into dreams. the breath of the ocean matching their own. So tonight, let it play for you as well. Let the waves rise and fall in your ears like a slow cradle. Let the wind thread gently through your thoughts. Let the creaking timbers and distant birdsong form a lullaby older than any words. Sleep here is not escape. It is return to rhythm, to rest, to the soft, eternal music of the sea. As the sea whispered and the wind hummed through the sailcloth, the Vikings sometimes added their own music. Not loud or triumphant, but soft, steady, and grounding. These weren't grand ballads or lively jigs. At sea, music became a companion to labor, a balm for homesickness, and a rhythm for survival. Picture it now, the soft creaking of the ship as a man begins to hum. A low tone, almost felt more than heard. Another voice joins and another, forming a layered sound, deep and slow, like waves overlapping in harmony. These were the Nordic chants, simple, repetitive melodies, wordless at times, or with phrases so old they no longer had fixed meaning. Some were work songs, used to coordinate rowing or anchor lifting. Others were comfort, tunes passed down from mothers and elders, hummed without effort during long watches or sleepless nights. The chants were often modal, neither happy nor sad, but floating somewhere in between, like the sea itself. The men did not sing to perform. They sang to endure. And sometimes, if wind and mood aligned, they reached for instruments. The lyre, with its wooden frame and gut strings, offered soft, plucked tones. Its notes drifted over the water, barely loud enough to disturb the rhythm of the waves. The tagelharpa, a bowed instrument strung with horsehair, could sound like the wind itself, mournful, whispering, ancient. Players often sat near the mast, their backs against barrels or bundles, playing quietly to no one in particular. The rhythm of the sea influenced the music. Songs were slow, cyclic. No sharp breaks, no quick flourishes. Even the sound of the plucked strings mimicked the creak of rope or the distant call of birds. Some tunes were so deeply tied to rowing pace that their rhythm became indistinguishable from the motion of the oars. Occasionally, foreign music would blend in. On distant shores, Norsemen might hear Celtic pipes or island drums. They brought fragments home, a curious rhythm here, a melody there, absorbed into their own tunes. Over time, Viking music quietly evolved, shaped not by conquest but by curiosity. Some melodies were never written down, but echoed for generations in memory. A tune hummed while mending nets. A lullaby whispered to a child as the wind tapped against a turf roof home. A verse begun by the hearth and finished aboard a creaking ship. The sea did not judge the quality of song. It absorbed them all, the imperfect notes, the half-remembered words, the chants that faded into silence. And for the Vikings, music was not entertainment. It was rhythm, memory, presence. Even now, when we imagine these voyages, it's hard not to hear something in the background. A string being plucked, a breath rising into a chant, the timbers echoing in soft accompaniment. And so tonight, imagine those sounds alongside the sea. The low hum of a chant that never quite resolves. The whisper of a bow drawn across aged strings. The rhythm of oars, like a slow heartbeat. The sea, steady and endless, harmonizing in the background. In that harmony of man, wood, wind, and water lies a calm deeper than words. When the sea grew still and the sails hung quiet, another kind of music emerged. Not from voices or instruments, but from the world itself. A light rain began as the faintest sound, barely audible at first, like someone exhaling over parchment. Then, slowly, it touched the sailcloth in a delicate rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. The droplet struck wood, skin, leather. Each surface offered its own tone, sharp, muffled, hollow, warm. To a Viking at sea, the rain was not a bother. It was part of the rhythm. The water that fell from above reminded them of the water below, a continuous loop, sky and ocean in quiet conversation. Rain cooled hot faces. It soaked cloaks and softened ropes. But it also lulled minds into stillness, especially when it came in sheets so light they barely disturbed the sea's surface. Sometimes it was gentle enough to sleep beneath, a canopy of sound that quieted even the most restless thoughts. Between showers or in the early morning hours, the sea was alive with birds. The calls of gulls came first, long, slow, echoing across the open water. Then came the sharper notes of puffins or the low murmurs of distant cormorants perched on unseen rocks. These sounds were not just decoration. They were navigation, weather warnings, and omens. But they were also comfort. A familiar bird cry told sailors they were near shore. A chorus of them circling the mast during midday reminded them the world was still spinning in its slow, ancient way. Some even believed birds carried news, messengers of the gods or ancestors. A bird landing on the prow might be a sign. A pair flying together might signal fair weather ahead. Or so the stories went. And in the deepest stillness, there were sounds that weren't sounds at all. The absence of wind, the silence between waves, the invisible weight of the ocean's breath. These were the moments when sailors looked inward. Some sat quietly, staring at their hands. Others closed their eyes and let their minds wander. It was in these silences that stories were remembered, that verses took shape. Not all history is made in action. Some is gathered in stillness, in the patient watching clouds, the quiet folding of sails, the gentle rocking of the world beneath. Even the ship itself added to this lullaby. The hull whispered along the waves. The sail rustled softly. The occasional groan in the wood was not discomfort. It was memory, the ship speaking in its own tongue. Every joint, every nail, every stretched seam was part of the story. And the ship, like its crew, seemed to listen to the sea's lullaby with reverence. In these quiet moments, between rain and wind, between birdsong and wave, a kind of peace settled over the ship, a shared stillness, a communal exhale. And for us, centuries later, we can still find that same calm. We don't need sails or salt-stung eyes. We only need to listen, to let the slow rhythm of water and wind, bird and silence carry us gently toward rest, because nature has always sung us to sleep. So now, as your eyes begin to grow heavier and your thoughts slow to match the rhythm of the sea, let us return one final time to the heart of the journey. From a departure under gray skies, to the struggle of rowing through wind and storm, to the whispered songs of distant shores, and finally the soft lullaby of the sea, you travel alongside men who carved their path across the North Atlantic, not just with axes and sails, but with endurance, rhythm, and silence. The Vikings are often remembered for their strength, their raids, their conquests. But in the stillness between the sagas, in the quiet creak of a longship drifting over cold waters, we find something more enduring. A spirit of resilience, a patient curiosity, and a deep respect for the vast unknown. They sailed not always to fight, but often to discover. Not always to conquer, but to connect. They brought back more than silver or stories. They brought new ways of seeing the world. And they left traces behind. In language, in place names, in bones buried under green hills. But most of all, they remind us that some journeys are best remembered in silence. So tonight, let the spirit of their voyage remain with you. Not the clang of swords or the crash of waves, but the hum of an oar in water, the rustle of wind in the sail, the low chant of men who knew the sea's lullaby by heart. Sleep now, if you haven't already. Let your breath become the tide. Let your thoughts drift like fog over distant shores. And let the longship of your mind rest in calm waters, anchored gently in peace. If this kind of storytelling helped you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are? It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there, falling asleep to the same slow unfolding of stories. You've been listening to The Sleepy Historian. This was your dose of boring history for sleep, soft-spoken Viking journeys, and calm bedtime storytelling. Until next time, may your sea be gentle and your dreams filled with quiet stars.